very warm welcome from my side. My name's Adam Pawloff. I'm climate and energy speaker for Greenpeace in Central and Eastern Europe, and also the managing director of Earth Talks, an event that takes place every year in Vienna, to which I'll say a couple of words in just a moment. First of all, a very warm welcome again to the two of you, and also to Verena, the curator of the exhibition. I'd just like to start off by saying a few words. First of all, I think the connection to the environment is clear. You might still be asking yourself, okay, it's still an art exhibition. What's someone from Greenpeace doing, moderating this? But I think there are quite a few connections, which I'll go into in just a moment. The first thing is that when I was thinking a bit about this evening and this exhibition, and sort of the role of art and photography, in particular with relation to sort of some of the work we do, and sort of what is one of the specific things about art. And I think that one of the things is that I think we often tend to overlook things which maybe artists don't. Put it another way, I think artists often act as a kind of, maybe as a filter, but also as a multiplier, a catalyzer, if you like, processing what they see and basically presenting us with the essence of that. And I think that, and I think most of you have seen the pictures downstairs, is very helpful for the work that we do as NGOs in terms of getting our message across. And in that context, we as Greenpeace in Austria have just had a ship up in the Arctic for the last couple of weeks. And on board was the Austrian photographer Andreas Bittersnich. And sort of the idea was to document the oil drilling that's going on in the Arctic at the moment, but also this kind of idea of, on the one hand, working with light and with darkness, contrasting, if you like, sort of the beauty and the beast, i.e. this beautiful but also fragile Arctic nature on the one hand, and these oil drilling platforms on the other. And he's produced some really beautiful work, which maybe one day might be presented here in Kunst Haus as well, which again really just helps with getting our message across. In terms of the exhibition, I think most of you have seen it. What is probably also worth mentioning is that all three photographers have been awarded the Earth Award for the work that's done here. Just to mention it again, Mandy Barker for Hong Kong Soup, Simon Norfolk for When I Laid in Earth, and Eduardo Leal for Plastic Trees, who, as Bettina mentioned, can't be with us in person today. But on the other hand, I think maybe the saved air miles from Bolivia are a positive environmental contribution in the sense of the message that these photographs also portray. It has been said, but I'd just like to say it again, many thanks to Felix Leutner for processing and mounting the photographs so we can really view them in all their beauty today. We're going to try and make this a little interactive. So, Verena, anytime you have a question, just jump in. And I have 2 or 3 questions myself, but then if any of you in the audience have questions, just give me a signal and we'll be happy to take them. And as I said, if anyone doesn't want to pose the question in English, would rather pose it in German, that's absolutely no problem. We can translate it. So, to start with you, Verena, maybe the obvious question, where did the idea for this exhibition come from, and how did you arrive at this topic or these topics specifically?
Hello, I'm happy to have you all here. I'm very happy that this exhibition takes place. It was some months to develop and to make this all happen. And it's a great honor to sit here with you and talk about your work. We at the Kunst Haus Wien, we have 3 major interests in our program. The one is very obvious, Friedensreich Hundertwasser, whose permanent presentation is on the 1st and the 2nd floor, and whose design of this architecture is like surrounding us. and then it is photography. And since many years, there is a strong focus on photography, and it even got more specialized since Bettina is director here and I became curator. And then a third and a new program is to look at artists who deal with ecological topics. And this is why, because Friedensreich Hundertwasser, as many of you know, probably he was very engaged with this kind of problems, and he had very he did manifestos and the way he lived, and you can see it in his work. But he was very important in the 70s and 80s also to get things going here in Austria, like this very famous waste to energy plant we have here in Vienna was redesigned by him, and in the I think 87 or so, and as far as I know, he didn't get any fee for it, but he asked to have waste separation installed in Vienna as a payback for his design of this plant. So he was an artist, but was really engaged in all these topics, and that brought us to the idea to look who are artists, where are the artists who are dealing with such topics nowadays. And in the garage on the other side of the courtyard, we have had several exhibitions in the last year. Now you can see the show which is called Climate Changes Everything, yeah, this is like we are focused. We look out in the world who are the artists, sometimes designer or architects as well, who make things like this visible. And yeah, that's why this topic is perfectly for us, because it even like combines photography and this way of artwork.
And so, where did you discover the two of them and Eduardo and their work?
Simon I discovered much longer before, and we've been in contact also since a longer period of time. And Lens Culture, this online platform of which I think is very important, a very good platform, and I really have a lot of times a look at this platform to discover artworks. And then I was in contact with them before, and then I saw they did this Earth Award in 2015, last year. And so I asked Alex Strecker, the managing editor, whom my big thank is to, because he was really so much engaged that all this can happen, this show can happen. And I kindly asked him if I could have a look at the submitted works for this award, and he generously gave me this admission, so I could look through all the photography work that was submitted for this award. And there were several kind of categories. And of course, then I saw Simon's work, and I was like, yeah, it's Simon again. That's great. But there I discovered the work from Mandy Barker and Eduardo Leal. And the three of them, they were won in the category Fine Art and Conceptual. And the jury was very good, so I could totally agree with it. I mean, I could have chosen other works as well, but it just was like, yeah, this work is really great. And then so it came along, and then I got in contact with all the three photographers, and yeah, then we needed someone who kindly helps us with printing and mounting the work. Yeah, and we found Fotoleutner as a perfect partner for this project, and thank you very much. Yeah, and so that's how I got to know them. And this is also shows that like online platforms for photography are very helpful nowadays, yeah, to come across very interesting projects and artists.
Thank you. So as I said, I'm going to turn this to the two of them, but if you have any questions in between, you just jump in. So I'm going to start with you, Mandy. And yeah, I mean, I've seen your work online, and I was just really struck by it, seeing it in person on the wall today. It really is incredibly impressive. Just this real contrast of beauty and, you know, this huge ecological problem that we have. And yeah, I mean, a simple question: how did you approach your work? How did you approach this topic?
The topic as a whole, I think, stemmed from when I was sort of walking on the beaches as a child and collected natural objects. And then more recently I began to realise that marine litter was a big problem, and especially plastics. So from my own personal experience, really, initially started the projects that I've done. The Hong Kong series that exhibited here, I was on a research expedition across the Pacific Ocean to see how many plastics were in the North Pacific Gyre. Somebody on the trip did a presentation of the waste in Hong Kong, and as soon as I saw those images I realised that my next series had to represent Hong Kong, because some of the beaches, the accumulation of waste was sort of 12 foot high, which was something I'd never seen before. So this inspired this particular series.
And because you mentioned you were on a research vessel as well, how much time goes into sort of research, maybe contact with scientists, really sort of going into the topic? Because, you know, I mean, obviously it's a complicated issue when you really dive in and get into the details. And how much time then actually goes into taking the work?
A lot of time goes into the research, because I want to find something that's that the public may be not aware of. They haven't read those particular journals or know about the particular species or areas that are affected. So from that, I then start collecting specific objects or going to specific areas, countries or whatever, to represent a project. The actual execution and photography of the images is quite minor in respect to the research and the effort that goes into collecting.
Yeah. Thanks. Simon, at risk of repeating myself, just the same questions to you.
What was the question?
So we'll start off. How did you approach the work that you've been doing?
Well, most of what I've done in the past has been about conflict, in particular Afghanistan. I was approached by an organisation in the UK called Project Pressure, who asked me if I would take the Afghan thing and apply it to environmental concerns, which I'd never thought about before, really. In particular, glacier retreat. And so I'd been thinking about the fire idea for quite a long time, and it seemed to me that the thing that excited me the most is a metaphor, is fire and ice. And that just seems a beautiful place to begin. And really the whole project began from that, because it just seemed the idea of fire and ice was the perfect way to photograph ice. So it began with that metaphor. The work in Afghanistan, I'm interested in the historical layeredness. When I photograph the British soldiers in Afghanistan, what you're photographing is a historical strata, like an archaeological fragment, because underneath that, above that British soldier is an American soldier in the 1970s, is a Russian soldier in the 1980s. An Afghan friend to me once said to me, "Why are the British so interested in the British Empire? We've had 2,000 years of people like you coming to Afghanistan and destroying my country. Each one of you leaving this kind of strata, this layer stacked on top of each other." So for me, what was interesting about the glacier was trying to reveal that time layer. And the line, the painted fire line, is a way of drawing that strata, that sedimentary layer of 1963 or 1981 or 2004. So that was taking the Afghan technique and applying it to the glacier. And then I knew that I needed a lot of work in terms of finding a glacier which was very well mapped, and that the mapping went back very far back in time, And a big thank you to Dr. Rainer Prinz from the Institute of the Cryosphere at the University of Innsbruck, who allowed me to read all of their academic papers about this strange Austrian obsession with an African glacier, and allowed me access to the maps so that I could be very certain that I was in exactly the right place when I was drawing these fire lines on the mountain that showed where the glacier was in 1963, 1954, 1934, I think was the oldest map that I had. And then obviously the newest data is GPS based.
So, I mean, you've answered, I think, at least part of the next question. How much time went into researching all of that, and how much time did you actually spend up on the mountain?
Well, the mountain was 18 days. It took 4 days to walk up. The problem is that by the time you're up the mountain, I spent all the money. So if it goes wrong, I am... So I had to make sure that everything worked. So I tested it very heavily in the UK. Tested it in the UK just to see how it looks. And then I was very worried that the flame would not take altitude at 4,000 meters. Maybe I can't, it won't burn. Or maybe the flame is this big. So then I went to Mount Teide on the island of Tenerife in the Canaries. It's just a very cheap place for the English to get high.
In both senses of the word, right?
It is a very cheap place for the English to get high. And did some experiments just to see if I could light the carpet at 3,700 meters, Teide. So that's almost as high as Mount Kenya. So that took up much more time than the actual photography because I was so frightened that I would accept the money. The New York Times magazine gave me $25,000, but I was so nervous once I had the money that I would arrive on the mountain and then I couldn't make it work, so I had to test it very extensively.
So obviously you've involved scientists in the preparation. A warm welcome from my side as well. Nice that you could make it. Any work with NGOs or other organisations preparing that?
No, more... I knew that it was going to be very expensive, and so it's easy for me to go and see a magazine because it's faster. Yeah, it's just easier for me. That's my track record. I work for magazines normally, and they know me. So Kathy Ryan at the New York Times magazine, although the budget was way outside of her normal stretch, but I was able to convince her, because I've been working for her for 10 years, and I've been in some tricky places for Kathy too, so I think if I thought I could make the pictures, then Kathy was quite sure that I would be able to do it. But I have to say, in all the time I was there, I only made 8 pictures. I shot 8 frames. There are 8. There are 8. That's it. Not a choice from 8. There are 8. There were whole nights when I never got a single picture out of it.
Simon, maybe it would be interesting for the audience to know how you made it, how these pictures were made, what you did.
Well, it's a long exposure. It's shot at night time, so you have to plan around the rising of the moon because the mountain is lit by the rising moon. You need to be able to see the glacier. I was looking to exposures of about 1 hour, which with my camera is 2 hours because of a strange technical thing. And the fire, so I make my fire machine out of rechen.
Wow.
Rechen. A rechen with some carpet and some wire.
Hazendraht.
Hazendraht, yes. Chicken wire.
Chicken wire.
And petrol. And it has to be petrol because it's all about petrol. And it's all about the burning of petrol. And I did experiments with lighter fuel and other, but it had to be petrol. And then I light this fire, and then I slowly, while the camera is locked open, drag the fire through the picture. In the daytime, I mark with electric torches, very small electric torches, I mark behind the boulders where my line is. And then in the nighttime, with the fire, I just have to walk and join together the dots, and then I have the exact line which I got from the maps. And on the mountain we had the maps, and my laptop had all the the maps so that I could find the line on the mountain. So it was kind of slightly crazy machinery, but it works very well.
Did we mention so far that this Lewis Glacier lost like 90% of its volume? Was it mentioned before?
Well, the thing that appealed to me about the fire line when I made the tests is a wonderful metaphor, petroleum, and the human use of petroleum. But also when I made the first pictures, it looked like lava. And Mount Kenya was a volcano millions of years ago. And I liked the idea that the pictures looked as if the volcano was spitting out a kind of poison, its kind of angry memory. And that this volcano was covered in a crown of glaciers, 14 glaciers. 100 years ago, it had 14 glaciers on the mountain. And now it's down to about 7, 8. And I think the Lewis Glacier is the biggest, but it will only last about another 10 or 15 years. And then it will just be bare. And so when you painted with the fire, it looked as if the volcano was vomiting up its kind of anger about, what have you done to me? What have you done to me? I've sat here for 1 million years with this crown, and then you discovered hydrocarbons, and in 100 years, I was naked. And that metaphor drove the work on a long way.
That's a very powerful message. I think an interesting fact in that context, of the 13 or 14,000 glaciers there are in the world, only 2 have actually grown over the past 50 years, and the other, however many exactly it is, have lost volume, and at times really considerable volume. And we talked actually before about the work of a National Geographic photographer, James Ballock, who's traced kind of the retreat of glaciers with time-lapse photography, which is also well worth a look. Mandy, what message do you want to send, and maybe to even specify that, what do you want people to feel when they look at your work?
I want people to feel shocked by what they see. I want people, when they're brushing their teeth at night, to think that the toothbrush they're using could be found in the stomach of an albatross chick. I want them to think about the way they use plastic on a daily basis, to think about the choices, when faced with another product, to maybe reuse plastic and not buy new, and just change the habits, really. If it's just a small thing, if everybody did that, then it would make a big difference.
How have you had reactions, and how have they been?
Yeah, people are generally shocked. I think the main aim with my work is to make every object identifiable. So when people see, whether it's a TV, a computer, a hairbrush, whatever it is, that they use these objects on a daily basis, and for them to sort of think that could end up in the middle of the Pacific, is a shocking, hopefully, reaction.
And you mentioned also before, I think, a 31-day trip across the Pacific, looking at the Pacific Gyre. Obviously, there was work with scientists involved in that. But is there sort of some way of, like, all of this data you've collected, all of these facts that you've been confronted with, you can kind of pack them in your work, or how does that kind of play in?
Yes, I did produce a whole series on the trip across the Pacific. Every piece of plastic that we brought on board, whether it be through trawling the surface, or larger pieces that we picked up, I recorded every piece that was brought on board. And yes, in the same way, that I've done the Hong Kong project, I've sort of tried to identify all the different pieces of sort of waste plastic that people use in Hong Kong, hopefully to relate to their sort of social conscience.
I think this is a very brilliant way how you work with this plastic debris, is that you sorted them in categories, like that you can connect with traditions or fests or daily life habits. Yeah. And for me, it's like when the people have the great habit to look away. We know it from our daily life. We are used to look away and from things we don't like. And the debris is anonymous somehow. when we see like these huge landfills, we are not connected. But through the way, because you like made categories and you can connect it to your daily life, that makes it so good, I think. So it works so good.
Yeah, this was the whole idea in Hong Kong. It was a direct response to, as the title suggests, 1,826 tons of plastic.
Unbelievable.
That goes into landfill every day in Hong Kong. And one of the images from the series, polystyrene, again relates to the habits in Hong Kong that most people eat out of polystyrene food containers, and 52 tons of just food containers go into landfill every day. So this is, something that I really wanted to highlight, specific to Hong Kong.
I want to go back to that question and pose the question to you as well. Particularly, you said, Simon, you're working in sort of more humanitarian, let's say, or conflict-oriented work before. What's the message you want to send? I think that's probably clear. But also that question, what do you want people to feel when they see your work?
Well, I think it's the massive disconnect for me is between the factual information that we see in a newspaper headline or in an academic journal and the consequence of the information. This winter the Arctic has had a terrible winter, worst winter on record, massive melt. I read that in my newspaper, I turn over the page. I don't know what to do with that information. I read the sport, right? So for me, it seems the problem for photographers is not to just record another puddle of ice, but visualize these problems. Turn them into something that is seductive, that is shocking, that is violent, that is outrageous, that is beautiful, any of those things. But every one of them is come and have a look at this, right? Engage with this. And that's all. It's a very simple... My photography has always worked like this. It goes, come here, come here, come here. That's all I do. And it has to be the idea of visualizing these problems, because the factual information itself is inert and inoperable. I cannot act upon that information. And it needs photographers or poets or dramatists or whatever is your field. I'm not those things, but to try and turn these things into things which affect and then turn that into some kind of action.
Maybe you mentioned it briefly, Eduardo's work. He's not here in person, but he's in our background. The work he did in Bolivia from this series of plastic trees, which are actually little bushes, and the way he did it was that he photographed them from a very low angle. The only thing he did, he's a photojournalist in a quite a traditional way, so he doesn't want to change anything in the environment he finds. But sometimes he made a little muck. A little hole in the soil to get it even the lower perspective, to make them really huge, to show this huge problem of plastic bags. And the plastic bag is actually the most verbreitete item on the world. It's written in the Guinness Book of Records, and you can find them everywhere. Everywhere on the planet, there is no untouched nature anymore. And I think also his approach was quite the same, and this works so well in this exhibition that this beauty, you can see it downstairs when he takes the photographs in dusk, when the sun goes down, and make them so huge. It's more like a portrait of these objects, sculptures, where we are looking, wow. But then the fact is, these plastic bags, they need years, sometimes hundreds, depends on the kind of plastic, but sometimes hundreds of years to go away Yeah, and nobody will come and remove them somewhere in the desert. And you can find these kind of places everywhere in the world. It's not only in Bolivia. But I just saw recently a documentary where I think it's in Morocco or so, where they Hollywood is filming a lot of their films, and one guy say, yeah, every time they come back we have to remove all the plastic from there. So that's maybe a reason why someone would take care of a landscape, but they would just stay there.
No questions. So I'm going to be a little provocative, and I think I'm going to turn to you, Mandy. So I think both of your motivation for doing it and the message you want to send is to make people aware of the problem. But let's say a plastic company, says, well, this is a wonderful opportunity to actually display our company in a positive light. $500,000, those photographs to market Borealis plastics in a good way.
Which plastic company exactly?
It's a big plastic company in Austria, but you can take any in the world.
I'd have to know more about the plastic company. I'd have to know if they had a plan for end of use, if the plastic company makes, for example, plastic bottles or something like that, do they have a plan for end of use, or just are they not bothered about what happens to the plastic afterwards? They would have to prove that they can do something for the environment, but no, I wouldn't be persuaded by money. It's the issue that matters, and yeah.
Good. Yeah, I mean, before you mainly, but I was very interested hatching plans for potential projects in Japan dealing with nuclear, the issue of nuclear. What are the next projects and plans on the horizon?
I'd like to take the idea. I've been on some other glaciers since then, because these pictures were a year and a half old. Last autumn, I was with some Indian scientists in the Himalayas on a glacier called Chotra Sigri. So I'm quite interested in extending, not especially about glacier retreat, but the idea. It interests me enormously about the glacier as a piece of geophysics. It seems to me that for something that's made out of frozen water, they're amazingly organic objects. They breathe. They rise and fall in the summer and in the winter. The surface of them lifts and drops. And I always thought that the only thing that I could compare, the first time I touched the Lewis Glacier, you ever put your hand on a glacier? It's an unbelievable feeling. And I thought the only thing that could compare to that would be to be in the Serengeti and somebody darts an elephant and you place your hand on the side of a sleeping elephant. Must be the only feeling. Yeah. Or, those 16th century paintings of a whale washed up on a beach, and all those Dutch townsmen are standing gawping at this monster that has arrived in the night in a storm. So that feeling of these things as kind of breathing really appeals to me, that they get bigger in the winter, they get smaller in the summer, they're disappearing up the mountain. They almost seem like they're kind of organic objects. And so I'd like to continue to photograph glaciers, but in other circumstances. So, for example, there's a glacier in the very far north of India, which is the highest battlefield in the world. It's the world's most stupid battlefield. India and Pakistan are fighting over a glacier which I think is 21,000 feet high, at 5,500 meters high. It's the world's most stupid battlefield, and they've been fighting for 10 years about nothing. So the idea of continuing to photograph them as these very peculiar spaces that seem to engender these very odd reactions from us. I think the idea of 4 or 5 glaciers, each one of them is a different place with a different kind of response. Some of them environmental, but some of them also to do with a conflict interests me a great deal. Yeah.
But maybe it's just not that stupid, because they are aware that this is a major fresh water resource.
Well, I think you probably know more about glaciers as water resources.
I don't know, but I thought there must be a reason, and glaciers are have 70% of fresh water resource in the world. So when they melt, it's not only like, oh yeah, it's a pity it was so beautiful and now it's gone.
It's true. I'm not sure whether that's true about this particular glacier.
Me neither,
It is at the headwaters of the Ganges and of the Indus. The water flows in two directions there, so it could be true. But I think the reason why I chose Mount Kenya for the Kenya project was of this indirect consequences argument, which is that obviously the fact that there should be a glacier in Africa is especially beautiful for me, but also that those countries in the world which are least able to defend themselves against climate change. In England, we will just build higher walls and fancy dams and pumps, and we'll save ourselves. But in Kenya, they can't do that. So those countries which have the least resilience to climate change will be some of the people who will be first affected by climate change. The disappearance of the glaciers on Mount Kenya will affect a little bit the way that water goes onto the agricultural fields of northern Kenya, but also that those countries have contributed the least to the climate change which is punishing them, because the amount of carbon produced by Kenya is minuscule compared to Britain and America and Russia and China and Austria. So you have this weird inverse reaction that those countries which have contributed the least will be punished the hardest and also have the least ability to defend themselves. And it's that strange interconnectedness that makes glaciers such weird objects for me, that makes them so fascinating, I think. It's probably true for you too, I think.
Yeah, where's life going to take you? Where are your next projects?
Well, I'm continually inspired by the research that's going on. It's evolving very quickly. So my next project, one I've just recently completed actually, is based on the fact that plankton are now eating microplastic particles, and it relates back to a marine biologist in the 1800s who collected plankton in Cork Harbour, and I've been back to Cork Harbour and collected plastics from the same place where he was collecting plankton in the 1800s, and I've had this relationship between sort of scientific discoveries over time. So that's based on latest research. So yeah, I'm forever sort of looking at the next thing, and my projects will be determined by, the next things that are discovered.
I'd just like to say, obviously, a big thanks to the two of you. It's been great talking. It's been wonderful looking at your photographs, and thanks for your work, and thanks for being here, and thank you, obviously, to all of you for being here this evening, and enjoy your evening.